Hey guys, I played on Wednesday at the Fitchburg Chess Club, the Wachusett Chess Club, in the fourth round of the Gail Lingner Memorial against Ken Gurge. He is rated 1785 and he had the white pieces. And he led with e4. I played e5, and after knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5, we have the Ruy Lopez. I played the main line a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castle, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop b3, d6. c3, castle kingside, and forgive me for blitzing through these moves, but they're very well known to people who study the opening, so I just don't want to waste any time here. And Ken played d3. I hadn't seen this before, and as often happens to me, I assumed that that meant the move was bad, but it turns out just to be another way white can play. I played bishop to e6, a move I was confident at the time was not very good, but I played it because I sometimes play moves I don't think are all that great against players I'm higher rated than. And that's because I expect that they won't find whatever I consider the best response. Now that's no insult to Ken, it's just that if you want to maximize your rating in chess, you shouldn't be playing exactly the same way against lower rated players as you play against higher rated ones. So I played bishop e6, pretty confident that white is much better after bishop c2, intending d4, d5, when this bishop is really out of place on e6. I was hoping Ken would take on e6, but he pointed out after the game that he had no intention of doing that. And my idea was that my rook would be opened up on the f-file at a time when his was no longer on f1 to defend f4, to defend f2, or to push f4. He played knight bd2 though. I played bishop takes b3, and he played a takes b3. And after the game, Ken asked me if I expected him to play a takes b3, and I said no. And I think I said no in a way that suggested that I thought the move was bad, but I really don't think it's a bad move. It opens up white's rook along the a-file and makes the a6 pawn a target. I played rook to e8, intending later on to play d5 and wanting to make sure my e-pawn is guarded. It also allows the bishop to head back to f8 and later over to g7 or h6. Ken went knight f1. I played bishop f8. In hindsight, I don't think this was a very good move. I think I should have played h6 here to stop bishop g5, in which case this bishop doesn't really have a good square to go to. On d2, it's not going to be doing very much. On e3, it'll be a target for my kingside knight. And in the game, after bishop f8, bishop g5, I realized that this bishop had become a pretty nice piece for white. I played h6, and I think Ken should have played bishop h4. Excuse me. And I can play g5, bishop g3, knight h5, I think. Although maybe not. Maybe there's just knight takes e5. Let's take a look at that. g5, bishop g3, knight h5, knight e5. When knight takes g3 allows knight takes c6. And if I take back on e5 with something, he takes on h5. Okay, well, I guess this doesn't work. But even if I had this move and white had to go back to g3 and allow me to take on g3, this bishop on f8 is now a really bad piece, and the f5 square is a huge hole. But Ken took on f6. I played queen takes f6, and either now or a little bit further into the game or a little bit earlier, I think the right idea for white was to pile up on this a-pawn on the a-file. You could double rooks, maybe rook a2 and slide the other rook over to a1, and try to make it really hard for black to do anything because he's stuck defending his pawn on a6. I think I would have pushed that pawn to a5, but it would have been very difficult to continue moving it to a4 with white having so many units on that square. Ken played knight e3, heading for d5 with the knight, and at first what was I going to do here? I think I was going to play queen d8 right away, but that leaves open the option of white showing up on f5 with a knight. And this bishop right now is not a very good piece, so I thought I'll play g6 instead, which takes f5 away from him and aims to activate the bishop later on, either on g7 or h6. Ken played knight d5, I played queen d8, guarding the pawn on c7, and he played b4. Okay, so I'm looking to kick the knight off of d5 at some point with c6. I played bishop g7. Let me explain that a different way, actually. I want to play knight e7 and c6 probably, but if I play knight e7 now, then knight f6 check hurts. So I played bishop g7 first, Ken played queen c2, and now I played knight e7. You know, it's possible I should have played a5 here, but I was having trouble working out what happens afterwards. And that's a square this knight can go to, but then from a5, where is the knight going? Back to b7, and then up to c5, when white can always kick it away with another pawn move. I wasn't really sure. I can bring it back to b8 and then try to get it over to f6 and then maybe try to make use of the f4 square, but 5 moves is a lot to spend on a single piece. So I decided to play knight e7, kick his knight away, and then I was thinking I might go king h7, knight g8, knight f6 as another way of getting this knight to the king side. But he took on e7, which I don't think was a good idea for white. I think white should have played knight e3. Just saying, okay, you got my knight off of d5, but this knight on e7 is now a piece of crap. Instead, he took on e7, as I said. I played queen takes e7, and he played rook a to d1. And this, I think, is where the things start to move in black's favor. Because white's a big source of play for white was the pressure he had on the a file. And once he voluntarily gives that up, not only does black not need a piece there defending a6, but he can start to open things on the queen side and use that file for himself. I played c5, and this is, I'm not sure if this is good or not. It allows white to get rid of a doubled pawn, but it means my a pawn, at least temporarily, is not going to be backwards anymore. But it also gives up the d5 square, which Ken, in short order, makes use of with this knight on f3. So the jury's out on this move, I guess. He played b takes c5, I played d takes c5, and I think black is, if not for the fact that white can use this d5 square, black's better here. There's more space, and all these pawns on the queen side are mobile. Ken played knight d2 though, and it was only now that I realized that he was going to go knight f1, knight e3, knight d5. And once that knight lands on d5, it's hard to imagine doing anything with the dark squared bishop that makes it at least as good as that knight. So I found myself unable to find anything better than trading that knight off on its way to d5. I think after the game Ken said he might not have played knight f1 to e3, that he was also thinking about using the knight on the queen side somewhere. But he said once I played h5, it was obvious to him that I was going to trade the knight off on e3. So he went ahead and played knight f1, after bishop h6, knight e3, and I did take it. Ken took back with the rook. That doesn't look very attractive because there's nothing to do really on the king side, but I guess he preferred it to the doubled pawns. I don't know though. I guess that pawn might be a target on e3, but there's counterplay on the f-file. Not really sure which way white should have taken here. And keeping this rook on the back rank will help white out a little bit more on the queen side. After rook takes e3, I played queen e6, which I think is an important move because this diagonal in particular is important right now. White would like to use the b3 square for his queen in certain variations, so I played queen to e6 to stop that, intending to push my a-pawn afterwards. Ken played b3, I played a5, and here I think he should have played rook a1, just saying, black, for now you can't move your a-pawn anymore. White hits that square 3 times. And I'm not sure what I would have done. I guess maybe queen c6, trying to make a4 happen after all. And I think during the game I was worried that this would allow white to play c4, but now that I look at it with the benefit of the extra objectivity that comes from not being under pressure, a4 may be good for black. C takes b5, a takes b3 is the idea, as silly as this looks. And now if queen takes b3, there's going to be checkmate on the back rank. And if the queen is captured, there's going to be checkmate on the back rank. So maybe what would white play? I guess rook takes a8. And rook takes a8. And again here there's no time for queen takes b3. So this looks very good for black. Alright, so white wouldn't be able to play c4 here, but maybe he could retreat his rook to e1 and help use that defensively on the queen side and maintain what hopefully is equality according to a computer. Ken instead though played c4 right away, and I had a plan against this move, which was to play a4, creating this double tension that you see sometimes. White could take on a4, but then after b takes a4, black's extra pawn is a passed rook pawn, whereas white's extra pawn is backwards on d3. So black should be significantly better here. And after what was played in the game, c takes b5, if I go a takes b3, white can play queen takes c5, and I think white's better here. He's trying to push his pawn up the board, and he's up a pawn. His pieces are a little bit less active maybe, but I didn't really want to go into this. But my plan instead was to go queen takes b3, which is what was played in the game. And now there's no time for queen takes c5 because of queen takes d1, which is a mate in 2. So white's a little bit stuck here and probably has to take on b3. Otherwise, pawns are going to start dropping. If the white queen retreats, she'd have to retreat to a square from which she defends the rook on d1, and the only square that also defends the pawn on b5 is b1. I'm trying to remember what my plan was now. Perhaps just to bring my other rook into the game, and if white trades on b3, I'm winning this pawn on b5, and it looks like I'm just winning it anyway. I mean, if d4 revealing an attack on my queen, I can trade queens and then take this pawn one way or another. So he traded, which I think was correct, and after I took back with my a pawn, he played rook e2. There are some issues here for white. It's a situation in which it looks like white should be getting to black's pawn before black gets to white's, but the problem is that after rook a5, white can't actually take the pawn on b3, or there's checkmate on the back rank. So white's in some trouble because of his lack of space for his king. So Ken thought for a while here and came up with a really interesting move, rook to e2. And now his idea is that if I go rook a5, he can start piling up on my b3 pawn, and after rook takes b5, put the other rook on b1, which seems to force me to defend that pawn again. And now he can bring his king slowly toward the c3 square, trying to grab my pawn on b3, and I couldn't, during the game, find any way to maintain an advantage. I thought his king would just come up the board, he'd take that pawn, and things would be equal again. But I found a good move here too, I think, in rook e to d8. White's king still has no breathing room. So if either of white's rooks leaves, if the rook on d1 leaves the back rank, rook to a1 will lead to checkmate. So this not only threatens c4 because of the pin along the d file, it threatens just to grab the pawn on d3 when white can't recapture. I think white's in big trouble at this point. Ken played rook to b1. I took on d3. What did I think he should have played instead? Maybe king f1, just trying to get the king out of danger and bring it closer to the action. Maybe it can help out and obtain equality for white at some point, or help white obtain equality at some point. I don't remember what I was going to do here. Maybe just rook a5, trying to take this pawn on b5. And white can no longer attack this pawn twice, because that would cost the pawn on d3. He played rook b1 instead, and I got to take the d-pawn, which was still hanging. He played rook e to b2, but black has c4 here, and these connected passed pawns are very protective of each other against rooks as they make their way up the board. So black should be winning here. In addition, black controls the only two open files, so black's pieces are more active as well. And should it be necessary, black can even grab a second extra pawn by taking on b5. I played c4. He played king f1, getting his king out of danger. I played rook to d4. I really wanted c3 to work, with the idea that after rook takes b3, c2 would win a rook. For example, after rook to c1, black plays rook takes b3. But the problem is that after my c3, white can play king e2, and I couldn't figure out how to clearly win from this point. If I take on b2, he takes my rook, and these pawns on the b file are going to start dropping. In fact, white may be significantly better here. These pawns will disappear, and then white will... No, that's not true. Black can attack this pawn, maybe, and win it. Is that even... Might not be the case. White might be considerably better here, because he can stick his king on c4 to defend his b pawn, and then he can gobble up these other pawns. So maybe something like rook a5 from black and king c4, and maybe black goes back and defends the pawn on a2 at this point, and white wants to come take it, and then black goes and attacks the b pawn again. Maybe this would lead to an equal position. So instead of c3, I played rook d4, bringing the rook out of danger to a secured square from which it defends c4 with tempo because it attacks the pawn on e4. And Ken played f3 to defend that, and was getting pretty low on time at this point. I played rook b8. I couldn't find a way to do well, to clearly win this or anything. I thought about rook a2. Let's see, what was I thinking here? I guess white can't really play rook takes a2, b takes a2, rook a1 because of rook to d2, but maybe he can because of b6. Rook b2, b7. So that would have allowed white, I think, to come back into the game. So instead, I just decided to round up the pawn on b5. Why not? Ken played king e2. I took on b5, and he played rook c1. Again, here I saw no way to win the game easily, so I decided to bring my king in. But first, I occupied the a file again. Why not control both files? He played king e1. I played king g7. He played h4. I played rook a8, with an eye later on to playing g5 and maybe using the g file from my rook. He played king f2 though, and finally with the king on this square, rook a2 makes sense, so I played it. Now if white takes on a2, which is what Ken did, and then plays rook a1, I have rook d2 check. And there's no more b pawn for white to use as a counter threat. Ken played king g3, I played c3, and c2 and c1 are just going to win the game at this point. Ken played f4, I played c2, rook takes a2 doesn't do anything because of c1 queen, and rook to c1, rook d1 will force the queening of one of those pawns. Ken ran out of time here, so that concluded our game. I'm at a score of 3 out of 4 now, and I should be on board 2 next week against Andrew Jesselson for the final round of the tournament. Thank you for watching.